Now, folks, Russ Ramsland, an American election security expert, and Debbie Georgatos from America Can We Talk, have just put together a great presentation about computer voting systems for dummies, if you like. Now, I've posted a link to Debbie's channel in the description below, so please get over there and watch the entire video, share it, and subscribe. Now, this is just part of it, and it's very, very good.
I'm sorry, there you go. You know, I just want to say this. Convince your friends. Actually watch this and think about it and consider sharing it with your friends. Because what really matters is one thing to get to the truth. If Sidney Powell succeeds in some litigation she has filed and you have courts taking whatever actions they do, ending up perhaps at the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court, ending up in Congress, and you're going to have a decision eventually. Someone's going to be president January 21st in 2021. Someone will be president. But the more people who grasp that there really was a serious substantive problem with election fraud in this country, the more widely that is believed and understood, the smoother the transition can be to whatever happens in 2021. Having the media simply attempt to shut down, argue against, claim it isn't true, this never happened, trying to have, in fact, the media coverage of Biden every day now is who he's considering, to be the chief cook and bottle washer at the White House. He's just trying to act like I'm here and the media is too. And it's important to understand we have plenty of time. This is the kind of litigation that normally would take years to prepare. We have 21 days. We have at least that number of days for Sidney Powell to get cases and the president's attorneys get cases before the courts and have them look at it to have a fair viewing of these very, very serious allegations relating to election fraud. Want to get that point in. So we have your slides, and I don't know, they're going to be up there in a moment, and I've got them printed out here, but if you, starting with what happened in Kentucky, this was kind of your first slide, we can put that up, and Matt, thank you so much. So this is, I've seen this before, and I know this tune, but I'd love to have you walk us through why this is relevant. This is 2018 Kentucky gubernatorial race.
Right. Why
this is relevant to the question of whether or not election fraud can be proved in America, and let's just watch this video.
Yeah, now folks, you've probably seen versions of this from the present election.
Yeah, a little background. We were called in to look at this race. It was a race very much like, it's deja vu, or as Yogi Berra would say, deja vu all over again. We had all these down ballot Republicans that absolutely swamped. They won their races by 200,000 to 300,000 vote margin on 1,000,004 votes that were cast, and yet Matt Bevin, the governor, lost by 5,000 votes, and it was just unexplainable. I mean, there was stuff that went on, but the fact of the matter is it was pretty unexplainable. We were called in to look at it. We did. We started looking at it, but it became very, very clear very quickly that between the media hounding Bevin to leave and the fact that not very many Republicans were interested in standing by him, he wasn't going to stay. And then some things happened later that probably made it a fait accompli. But in the course of looking at this, we got 5 hours of the CNN footage that night. And we wrote a little script to watch the vote changes, and we noticed some things that frankly were amazing. So let me tell you what you're looking at. This is a live feed from what's called Clarity Elections. And Clarity Elections, until recently, or maybe still, there's a lot of debate about that, has server in Frankfurt, Germany. And the votes from 28 states go there, and that's what is the feed into CNN. It goes through the Associated Press or Decision Desk HQ, but it's a feed through. So what you see here is the live feed, and then the banner down here is created by CNN. And you'll notice that in both cases, Bashir has 673,000, and Matt Bevin has 662,000. So it's late in the evening, 95% of the votes are in. This was the last show, Anderson Cooper of the night. And what I'm going to do is I want you to watch this, because there will be an update here, and then a split second later, this will update to match it. But first, we're just going to watch it all the way through. It's just a few seconds. And then we're going to come back and frame by frame show you what you missed. So go ahead and play it so they can see it. Here they are talking. Watch this. Boom, there's the update. And now this guy is chatting. So now, if I can, if you would pull it back a little bit until, yeah. All right, and then all we need to do is right here. Now the update has occurred. I want you to notice Andy Bashir in the update now has 674,508 votes, where they haven't updated this yet. He had 673,948. So, just like you'd expect in any update, Andy Bashir has picked up 560 votes. But let's look at the case of Matt Bevin. Matt Bevin had 675 now, but a minute ago he had 665. So he has just gone down 560 votes at the exact same second that Bashir has gone up 560 votes. This is the kind of thing that goes on inside the computers, and we're going to walk through today some of the reasons why that actually happens, and we're going to show you some real hard evidence from this race, this presidential race, why this sort of thing needs to go away. This is the kind of thing that the American people do not want in their voting system.
That's excellent. I don't know. Let's anything else in this slide, or should we go to the next slide?
Let's go to the next one.
Okay.
So most people don't know what the voting system really looks like. And so just to give you an idea, this is the voting place where you are, and you and I vote here. And then it goes into central counting. And this is very generalized, by the way. And you've got poll books and voter rolls. You got databases. You have tabulation software, reporting software. You have what's called an unofficial database and an official database. And the storyline, of course, is that none of this is connected to the internet. The truth of the matter is everything in red is complete total internet. So it's completely connected all the way back here to the internet. And the idea is that there is this, quote, official database that's not. But the truth is, when our guys looked at it, we realized they're both behind the same firewall. And so it's very easy if you could move votes down here to the unofficial to then move them into the official, which, whenever it's certified, goes to the Secretary of State. Couple of points. It is connected to the internet. Anyone that tells you it's not is just being ridiculous. In fact, if you look at any vote company's manuals, step one, connect it to the internet. So
Okay,
there
can
it
I
is.
jump in and ask a quick question? Is part of the reason, I'm glad you're doing this, part of the reason we're going over this is one of the defenses of the people, we're not connected to the internet. That's one of the defenses they say that says, proving therefore none of this election fraud could be occurring in the way you're saying. So that's an important point to hammer back. Yes, they are connected to the internet. Takes away a major first line of defense.
Sure. And of course, only common sense, because after all, how do all these counties report to the media on election night like that if it's not connected to the internet? Of course it's connected to the internet. And the fact is, these two are not firewalled from each other. They are not. So we can go and push votes back here. So your vote goes here, and it may go there by a thumb drive. It may go there by a PCMIA card. It may go there by a modem. It may go there wirelessly over the internet. But this is a vulnerable place, and we found ways that we could go in and actually switch votes at this level. Let's go to this level. We also found we could go in and we could change the actual tabulation software. This is the software that sort of adds up and keeps track of how the votes are and where they are. Let's go to the next one. We also found that we could change, in many cases, the unofficial database itself. We could go in. We found lots of instances where the intruder tracking software on that database is turned off, as well as the security software is turned off. We also found that we could go into most of these companies. They were nice enough that if you reveal the hidden files on their public-facing sites, they post the passwords. They post the administrator name. So we can go in here and change the software, which of course gets loaded here and eventually gets loaded here.
Can I jump in again? I'm sorry. I'll feel really bad if I ever make you lose your train of thought, but the relevance that we're talking about right now is your team of cyber experts was able to get into this data, which most people assume is private and protected, but they were actually able to get in it to see it to start with.
Oh, yeah.
And they're able to see the passwords that were actually being used by the voter election officials in entering or revising this data. That's the passwords they're seeing.
Correct. They're not being protected. And the fact is, none of this requires anything that would be called hacking or anything. This was just all standard tools.
Wow. No hacking required at all at that level.
They just used standard tools to find all of this stuff. So it was amazing. We can trace, by the way, then, that votes go from here to one of several places that are all internet. But the one we're going to talk about right now is Clarity, because we saw some problems there. Clarity stores a lot of their files up on the AWS cloud. They have S3 bucket vulnerabilities that, had our guys wanted to, we could have easily exploited and gone in there. Clarity, by the way, is owned by a company called Seidel. That's a Barcelona, Spain company, and this
here we go again, Seidel
server is in Frankfurt, Germany. And so all this stuff is here, and then it flows here. Now, the point I want you to understand is that if you can change the votes here, you can download them back here. If you change the votes here, you can download them here. But we've already said you could also change votes here and here. And what we found is that the audit logs are what these companies call voluntary, so that they're not really particularly good audit logs. And you can go in and do these sorts of things and do it pretty much undetected, or you can even change the audit trail. So it was very serious. And the reason to walk you through all of these is that what we have seen in this election is that there have been multiple places and ways that the game is being played now. It's looking a lot more like Venezuela than the United States. So let's go to the next one. So just for fun, we teamed up with some folks, openrecords.org, and they did a fabulous job. They downloaded the files of the cumulative voting every day, so that on a Tuesday they would download the voter record of every single person that voted. And we use the hash, which is simply the addition of all the zeros and ones that are in that file. And we use that hash to be a unique identifier for that vote record. Now,
for that vote log.
For that vote record.
Record, okay.
Individual voting records. So we would see those on Tuesday. And then Wednesday, we would get supposedly Tuesday and Wednesday. And then Thursday, we'd get Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And suddenly we started seeing Tuesday's hash change. Now, the only way Tuesday's hash changes is if that vote is being tampered with. Because that hash is the zeros and ones added up in that entire voting record. And that was just amazing, because that allowed us to track at least a lot of what was going on. There were 57,000 votes in Dallas County whose hashes were either modified or the vote itself disappeared in this last election. We ended up calling people phantoms, ghosts, and then outright purges. Purges, of course, was your vote was just absolutely purged, and it went away. And there were, I forget, like 5,000 of those. Phantoms, those are people that check in and they say, hey, I'm here to vote. And the check-in people say, sorry, you've already voted. And they say, well, no, we haven't already voted. And phantoms come about a couple of ways. Either one, a ballot is cast somehow and not associated with someone, and so the voting people go ahead and associate it with someone, and then that someone happens to show up later and want to vote. That's one way. there can be mismatches in the databases so that you go in and vote as George Williams, but your vote is attributed to Bill Smith. There are lots of reasons, but there were a lot of phantoms. And then ghosts. And ghosts are people who are living and voting from your house, except you've never seen them and never met them. And if you go to openrecords.org, there's a little link there that allows you to search with your street address in Dallas County records, and you'll find out who's living at your house that you've never met or seen.
Really bad. Okay.
Yeah, you gotta love it, right? So anyway, and incidentally, for those of you living in Highland Park in Dallas, we saw 10 full blocks of all those votes purged, completely wiped out, and then selectively, not all of them, but selectively over the next few days, brought back, but with different hashes.
Okay, let me go back to your figure of 57,000 votes in Dallas altered during early voting.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a kind of thing where it could be, I mean, if you're the defender of the Dallas system and you say we're perfect, that's a normal thing, is there any logical explanation, any explanation you would know of that they would give and say, oh, that's just because we do something in the system? Is there any logical explanation?
Not like that, no. Once your vote goes in and your vote record is attached, that should be sacrosanct. It should not change.
Like the bucket of apples. You put those 12 apples in, that's what's there.
Yep.
Okay, and then on the people who, a particular neighborhood, which is very odd that was removed, only partially re-uploaded, no explanation for that makes sense. I mean, I'm just trying to figure, because this is...
Not this. No, that makes no sense at all. We saw people who were purged because in some cases they double voted and got caught. We saw people who were purged because they got mail-in ballots 2 or 3 times and were good enough to say so. We saw the mail-in ballots that people brought in and canceled. We saw all that, but there were still 5,000 purges, a little over that, maybe 5,200, for which there's absolutely no good explanation. We saw some poor guy, a Biden voter actually, who went and they went to vote, and they said, well, you got a mail-in ballot, you have to bring it in. And they said, well, no, we didn't get one, and they had a big argument. And so they finally went home and looked around, dug through the mail. Sure enough, here were these mail-in ballots. So they took them back to the voting place, and they turned them in, had them canceled, and then they got to go vote. And they did.
That's the way it's supposed to work.
Yeah, and then the next day we saw their vote get purged.
Wow.
Yeah,
okay.
You can't win for losing.
One thing I want to jump in and say, though, about this is you're talking about Dallas County, which is where we happen to be, but this is really for our listeners. This is anybody understanding if people can do this in Dallas, where, we, Texas, turned down the Dominion voting machines because they were problematic, but yet we have other equipment. This isn't just an attack or critique on Dallas County. This is this shows the vulnerability of electronic voting machines that could be happening anywhere in America.
Oh yeah, and we're going to show you exactly how some of this really ends up looking this way.
Okay.
Okay.
So right next.
So let's go to the next one. We talked about ghosts. These happen to be 4 ghosts that are living at this address. Actually, there's another one. We saw a ghost get added during it. Now, it's interesting because this person lives in New York. Everyone else lives in Australia.
Oh, wow.
But they all got mail-in ballots, and they all voted in this election. And we talked about phantoms, and we talked about that. So we kind of went over that. But openrecords.org will give you a wonderful report about what actually was found and what went on here.
Okay, one thing, I'm trying to anticipate people saying, well, these are relatively common names. These 4 names are listed. So the way you can tell that these really are the same person who lives in Australia, for example. Is it because is it a VUID that they're, how do you know that that's not a different Kimberly Ann?
Well, because we were able to find the street that they live on. They live on Greycluse in New South Wales, Australia. That's where they actually live. And so it really wasn't very hard. And then we went out on social media. We looked at them. Let's see, we're missing Rose Orlando. She actually doesn't even look old enough to be voting on her social media. But anyway, so they're all in Australia.
Okay.
All right. The first thing you need to know, and this has been all over the news, and there have been all kinds of discussion about it, but the truth of the matter is, in all these voting systems, and many of them are quite similar. For instance, ES&S and Dominion share a common ancestor in Diebold, because at one point ES&S had Diebold, and then they sold off part for certain antitrust reasons in 2010, I think. And so Dominion ended up with some of theirs. And they also relate back to a company called Smartmatic.
Here we go again, Smartmatic.
So there's lots of incestuous and generational stuff going on in all these voting companies. Dominion is the one that is under such scrutiny right now. And they're having kind of a hard time. The Pennsylvania legislators last Friday were going to question Dominion. They wanted to talk about this. And I happen to have some personal knowledge of about 82 questions that were given to the legislators to ask Dominion the next day. And with an hour of the time that those questions were delivered, Dominion decided that they did not want to attend the hearing, and they lawyered up. Mm-hmm. And we've been seeing all their people start getting off of LinkedIn. I mean, it's like, this is not how people act, really, when they're innocent.
Yeah.
Exactly. They're running for cover now.
I'm telling the truth. I do want to have it. I know you're going to go into the details, but what is an algorithm?
Well, an algorithm is just a mathematical formula that can take either constant intake variables or changing intake variables, run it through a mathematical formula, and spit out an answer. And in the case of what goes on here, this is something that no one really seems to understand. These voting systems, when they're using their algorithm, which in the case of Dominion is called ranked choice voting, these algorithms are no longer counting votes. If you vote and I vote and Matt votes, and two of us vote for one person and one of us votes for the other, we expect that to be 2 votes and 1 vote. But that's not what these systems do. These systems take all 3 of our votes and they put them in the same bucket, and then they award them on a point system, so that the guy we both voted for may get, instead of 2 votes, 1 3/4 votes, and the person you voted for happens to get 1 1/4 vote.
I'm sorry, that what you're describing is not the way it's supposed to be, or this is acceptable, this is the way it's been for years, and it's fine to do this, assigning points versus tallying votes?
No, that's absolutely wrong. You should never be.
Right.
I mean, I'm fooling with your vote. I'm taking a percentage. I don't know about you, Deb. I've never been able to go in and cast 1.32 votes.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But that's what this does.
So this is built into the software, not just in Dominion systems, but in other voting systems as well.
But this happens to be Dominion, and you can go to their Democracy Suite user manuals, section 11.2.2, ranked choice voting, and it'll go through there, and it will tell you exactly that. And this is the exact manual that it comes from. So let's go on, and let me show you something else you'll enjoy here. Now, let's talk about what the algorithm is. The algorithm comes from something called SMOTE, and that stands for Synthetic Minority Oversampling Technique. And it's an offshoot of SMOTE, and in Dominion's case, it's called the Weighted Inclusive Gregory Method. And you know they're doing it because this is actually a screenshot, and you see right here, it says, hey, the algorithm I want to use is the Weighted Inclusive Gregory Method. So this is not a secret. It's right there in their own operating manual. This is hard evidence that A, there is an algorithm. And in a minute, I'm going to show you hard evidence that votes are being awarded by an algorithm instead of how you actually
A tally.
voted.
Yeah, instead of a tally. I want to ask you about algorithm, though, again, this concept, because I think that people hear this word, and if you're not math-oriented, as I am not, to understand the many variables they can introduce. For example, you could say algorithm, I'm not saying this exists precisely, but, for every 5 votes for Trump, award 10 for Biden. I mean, something you could set a simple rule like that. Or you could say for every 5 votes for Trump, give Biden 10, but if Biden comes up to in excess of 55% of the tally in that district, then pull back. I mean, you can vary the algorithm based on vote total. And you can make the algorithm adjust almost any way.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. In fact, it's important when you start looking at some of these, and I'm going to show you an example in some results in Pennsylvania, how a guy on Rumble did some great work. I don't know who the guy is, but he did great work in trying to start untangle what exact algorithm is being used here. And we're going to get there, but to get there, I need to go, let's go to the next slide. And I want people to notice this little paragraph right here. Continuing ballots first round. Each round will reuse the total number of ballots assigned to candidates in the first round for each subsequent round. Therefore, the threshold will remain the same throughout the tabulation. What does all that mean? Well, threshold is what you were talking about, Deb, when you say, well, if you get up to 5,000 votes, then something needs to change. Or if you get up to 60%, something needs to change. 60% or 5,000 votes, those are all examples of a threshold that then changes the algorithm, and it either goes and works somewhere else or it changes something internally. But in all these cases, it's taking buckets of votes and it's manipulating them. Okay? So it's interesting to know that this one says, hey, I can download a whole bunch of rounds and just keep using the same vote allocation that I have been using in other cases. So let's go ahead. Let's move ahead to the next one. See, that was the one. So how do you know an algorithm is being used? Well, actually, it's not very hard. This happens to be a screenshot of raw data. You'll see the timestamps here, et cetera. And you'll see Trump votes are 1,925,865.66.
Well, someone's only a 0.66 person.
Apparently, it was a very short person or a very young person who cast it, and 1,615,707.52. So all of the votes have decimal points.
Okay, where did you get this data?
This was pulled off, I think this particular data may have come off of the Michigan Secretary of State site. I think that's where this particular screenshot came from. There was some New York Times data that came out of Edison Research that's been used in a number of these too. Although I will tell you, interestingly enough, in the past 24 to 48 hours, we're starting to see all this data disappear off the...
I was going to ask
Gone.
you about that. I've been hearing that, yeah. So what we're staring at is actual data, whether, I didn't mean to pinpoint necessarily the precise entity within Michigan, but the notion is this is their data, not data you extrapolated.
Oh, no.
Yeah, their data.
All of this study that I'm doing, this is it was publicly published, available data from either reporting sites like Edison Research or secretaries of states, or in some cases even counties reported the data and put it on their own county website. Dallas had data like this on its own website.
Okay, so this is the decimal to having a term, the decimal point.
Correct.
The decimal, the point we're making is that the existence of decimals in a vote tabulation is signaling it's not a straight out vote, 3,000 for this person, 2,000 for that. It is a fact that an algorithm or calculation is being done, and you end up with a non-even number.
Correct.
As the vote total. So the far right column, the furthest right, is Biden votes. The next one to the left of it is Trump votes, and both of them have a decimal point and then some other numbers. So in all cases, those numbers are calculations, not straight up. I know I'm repeating, as my dad used to say, I'm repeating for emphasis emphasis, but this really matters. This is
Of
crazy.
course this matters, because
It's
we
crazy.
all think that it's a vote is a vote is a vote, and that's not what's happening.
Yeah. Yeah, it's huge. Just this point alone. Make someone who's defending Dominion or whatever company, how do you defend a .52 vote, a .808 vote? How?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's, I will make one more point. This is raw data. Now, by the time you get up to reporting it, of course, they will round that to 866, so you don't see those decimals. You have to go look at the raw data to see really exactly where
Which
it
they're
is.
now taking down, so thank goodness you did. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay, so go ahead. So some guys, a guy did some great work to try to see what happened in the algorithm. And it's amazing because if you look at a lot of this timestamp data, let me tell you what happens is votes come through in batches. Dominion, for instance, you load 50 ballots to be counted in a batch, and that is a batch file.
A physical piece of 50 pieces of paper?
So supposedly 50 pieces of paper.
Okay.
Okay, that's what's supposed to happen. And it goes through and it scans them all and it creates what's called a ballot image, which is really a picture of it. And then it's that ballot image that actually gets voted. Now, what happens is, if in that stack of 50 votes you get a bad ballot, all of the votes will go into not the voted file in the computer, they will go into a different file, sort of a holding file, and they are then dealt with differently. And we're going to come back to those in just a minute because they're an important part of the puzzle. But in this case, what we're looking at is, let's assume that Trump at midnight had 200,000 votes and Biden had 100,000 votes, and whoever wanted Mr. Biden to win needs to flip 100,000 votes in just to get even, and then they need a margin of victory, so 110,000 votes. All right, let's go ahead. Next. So 100,000 votes is the amount of votes, 110,000 votes are the number of votes that you want to flip. So what they can do is they can set up inside the algorithm various ratios so that this would award 1 vote for Trump in the bucket of votes for every 16 votes that Biden gets. This one could award 1 for every 48. This one would give Trump 3 for every 48. This would give 5 for every 31 and 1 for every 60. And by the way, these were observed in Pennsylvania's timestamp batch processing.
Wow.
And you see batches come through, and these ratios are just being applied and applied and applied and applied. So then what happens, it would appear, is that there's a certain number of votes that this ratio is supposed to go get. And at such time as it gets that many, it disappears. So what happens? Well, the first thing that you see in Penn is that the 1 to 16, say they had to catch 4,000 votes, they go and they apply that ratio in the algorithm to precinct 1, 2, and 3, and it runs for 3 hours. And then at the end of 3 hours, you see very clearly in the timestamps, boom, go ahead, please. That same ratio then gets assigned here. And it's supposed to run for 4 hours. Now, all the time it's running, when it was running here for 3 hours and running here for 4 hours, it was collecting votes. It hadn't got to 4,000 yet, though. So then at the end of 4 hours, it flips into 3 more precincts, and it runs there for 2 hours. And during that time frame, it gets its full 4,000 votes, and then boom, that algorithm is done.
Okay, I got to jump in. So these algorithms being set ahead of time, I mean, first of all, to back up, all the voting machines are supposed to be doing is measuring actual ballots. How many voted for Biden, how many for Trump?
Correct.
And you mentioned, as you started this description, that if there's a batch of ballots, 50 of them or whatever, and there's some reason a troublesome ballot, then the whole bucket if it's in a bucket of 50, it gets put in a separate bucket. Because, okay, when you say soiled, that could just mean because someone filled in both or some other problem is imperfectly filled out ballot. Is that, okay. So then they have 49 ballots would have been fine, but one was problematic. They all get put aside, and it's that bucket to which they're applying this algorithm that you're describing. Is that right?
Can be, although they could actually manually go into that bucket and accept, reject, or change the ballots.
You know
We're
what I
going to
mean?
come back to that.
Okay, not physically manually, electronically manually
Well,
pull
keep
them out.
in mind, I said it takes a ballot image. That's an electronic
Okay.
picture. And then when it goes into that bucket, they can then pull that up and they can say, gee, what do they really mean? Stray marks, or it got crumpled, or I think it really means he meant that vote.
Yeah.
And that's literally, it's in the manual.
Okay.
Yeah. But these can all be flip votes, because remember that assuming it doesn't go into that bucket where they're going to manually be able to play with it, it goes into the regular vote manual. That's what this gets applied to.
This gets applied to the regular vote tally.
Yeah.
The tally, okay.
And you go through here. Now, the way you get decimals is, if you have a 1 to 16, what happens if 54 votes come through? Well, it's not all even. And so now you start having to get decimal places as it tries to allocate those.
This is, to state the obvious, not counting. This is not counting votes.
No, this is rigging votes.
Rigging votes.
Yeah, this is rigging elections. This is what they do in Venezuela. Not supposed to be doing that in the United States. But this is what happened. And so I'm pretty sure this is why Dominion didn't really want to come and have a conversation with the Pennsylvania legislature. But that's kind of how it works. So that is one level of how you rig an election, is with an algorithm. But let's talk about that. Let's go back one. Remember, we said X equals 110,000. But what happens if, despite it all, this guy keeps doing in places where it's not being rigged? What happens if 110 isn't enough?
Like on election night?
We have some things that can be done then too. Don't worry. Go ahead. So the points I want to make that we've all gone through. They go into a computer bucket, and points are awarded based on an algorithm. One bad ballot and a 50 ballot counting batch can cause that whole batch to go into that adjudication file. That's actually what they call it in the software manual, and that's really controlled by the operators. And that is one way you can create huge numbers of votes in huge spikes, because you could literally park a lot of votes in there and then suddenly just say, okay, assign them all to one guy, boom, or assign 90% of them to one guy. Mm-hmm. So let's look at that. This is what we observe.
Now, folks, watch here.
This happens to be Michigan, and this is what we call a ballot velocity. In other words, the speed with which ballots are being counted, supposedly being counted into the system. And what was interesting about this is, if you look at Kent County, Macomb, Oakland, and Wayne County, you'll see as the evening went on, and now we're like 6 o'clock in the morning, suddenly you start seeing these huge numbers of ballots being counted.
So the spike is faster counting, allegedly. Am I supposed to reflect?
Yeah. Okay. This is how many ballots suddenly hit. And we have the time frame that all of these ballots actually hit. So we know how long it took to process all those votes. We also know how many pieces of equipment were at all those locations. And so the math gets to be pretty simple. And what basically this tells you is that if you are driving a Volkswagen Jetta and the policeman pulls you over for doing 540 miles an hour, you're supposed to believe that Jetta could do it because the policeman told you. Same thing. There is no way the equipment on hand could have processed anywhere near that number of ballots. It is physically completely impossible.
Boom. Got 'em.
And the
Wow.
numbers are huge. I mean, I think this was like 280,000 in just these 4 spikes. Too many ballots.
Yep.
So people talk about, well, is there evidence? Yeah, this right here is more than evidence. It's proof that something is wrong, just like decimals
Yeah, and Sidney Powell will be using this.
are proof that something is wrong.
Well, decimals and possible counting speeds. Has there been a response from Michigan? I don't know if anyone has had to try to explain this. No one in the Michigan system has tried to. Okay.
No. Okay. Let's see here. Another thing that's interesting. This happens to be Minnesota data. All these townships, look at these turnout percentages.
Is that registered voters turning out?
This is how many people voted compared to the registered voters.
Yeah. Okay.
So 3.5 people voted for every registered voter in Benville.
Oh, really? Oh, dear.
1.44 voted for, the national average is generally around 60, 65.
And and those are for good elections when people are into it.
And in fact, when we look back there was like 3,200 precincts that had 100 plus, actually 99+% turnout. Totally impossible.
Yeah. And again, any word from Minnesota, any accounting for this?
Nope, not yet.
Because,
No, we just said, hey, let's just take it to 80%. Let's not go all the way down to 65 or 70. Let's just go down to 80, which is still
Healthy.
really outside the realm of rational.
Yeah, very healthy turnout.
But if we do that, this is over 400,000 votes, like 430,000 or 470,000. I forget, I've gone through so many numbers in the last few days. But the point is, this is 400,000 something votes in Minnesota.
It's simply breathtaking. And
Yeah, now folks, I'm going to stop here. But please watch the entire video, which includes a part at the end where Debbie debunks the left-wing notion that Sidney Powell was fired.